Hi, everyone. It's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new here. Each week, I record a YouTube live talking about our weekly newsletter. This is the opportunity to skip reading the entire newsletter and just get the short version, the executive summary. I also am going to provide a lot of the context, my opinions, and what all of the different reasons that I included the different topics in this week's newsletter. If you would like to subscribe to the newsletter or if you'd like to read it in full, it is linked down in the description box down below. Today, we're going to be talking about the April 1st, 2026 newsletter. And this newsletter is entitled, "It's a Cost, It is a Strategic Investment." If you haven't been here before, each week, the main thing with the newsletter is I am going to share happenings in our industry in terms of new facility openings, new lawsuits, new products, innovations, all of that. But I also start each newsletter with an op-ed in terms of something that has been on my mind in terms of how that could impact how you're working in the aquatic industry. So this week, the story that I wanted to share, some of you might have heard this before if you've worked in customer service for a long time. The way people talk about Disney, there are Disney principles that have percolated outside of the Disney ecosystem to other businesses as a good practice. So, for example, I remember I learned many years ago a Disney practice allegedly is to push in chairs and clean up tables and seating during breaks at events. So this is a habit that I picked up probably 10 years ago, and I do this during our certified pool operator courses, or I do this during an in-service that I'm hired to do. But a Disney principle that I had learned was that you always tidy up the chairs, the tables, the seating of your attendees between sessions. That makes them come back to the room and feel like it's been reset and reorient to the next session of learning. So the article I shared this week was a Ritz-Carlton hotel group principal. I had heard this several times over the years, but this came to mind, especially this week, after I had had some really bad customer service experiences over the last couple of weeks. I've been really trying to catch up on some home maintenance as well as some car maintenance and some other things like that. And without getting into the specifics, we've all had experiences where we have bad customer service. And for me, unfortunately, I'm always wondering why, right? My husband would say, just move on, who cares? But for me, it's always about the why. Was the customer service bad because the staff did not have sufficient training? They did not have sufficient resources like standard operating procedures, sufficient knowledge, sufficient leadership or supervision, sufficient autonomy, sufficient knowledge, right? There's so much that goes into a bad customer service experience, in my opinion. Absolutely, someone can be having a bad day and they just snap and lose it. But usually, in my opinion, failures in customer service come down to a clear why or a clear gap. And so I wanted to share the Ritz-Carlton story, which is that, and again, this is all out in the public sphere, may or may not be true at this point in time for the Ritz-Carlton Group, which is now, I believe, under Bonvoy Marriott. But the business principle that they're making for customer service is that staff or team members are authorized to spend up to $2,000 per guest to facilitate something that they want or need, resulting in a positive experience at the property. And the reason that that number is so high is because that is seen as a strategic investment in the guest relationship as opposed to just a cost or a line item. Now, in aquatics, none of us have $2,000 to drop on one particular customer. And I know a lot of you are also nonprofit or you're municipal or you're publicly funded. And so it would not be considered fiscally responsible to spend $2,000 on one guest's experience, the same way they could in the private sector at Ritz-Carlton Group. However, I do think this principle largely applies to aquatics in terms of the day-to-day friction points, the problems, the inconveniences that staff manage when it comes down to basic supplies or equipment that would really make a big difference. So I know one of the ones that I've always been very passionate about is feeding the staff during busy periods. I'm not suggesting that I'm going to provide lunch every single day of the year to an aquatic staff, but if we have a big event like a swim meet, if we have a busy week in terms of a lot of swim lessons or programming, it may make sense to just order $50 worth of pizza or go to Costco and get a bunch of instant noodles like ramen or mac and cheese cups. It may make sense to go get $20 worth of ice cream pops. There's lots of little things that can be done to facilitate team member success, which then in turn results in customer satisfaction and customer success and customer repeat business. It's not also just about the team members, it can also literally be about the equipment. So when I'm consulting and visiting different sites around Alberta primarily, but anybody that I'm consulting with, I often see little hacks or creative ways that people have come up with solutions. And there's nothing wrong with that. They have thought very creatively how to deal with a day to day problem. But it's also very telling because some of these solutions would only cost $20 to $50 to fix. So color coded scoops for chemicals or restaurant squeeze bottles for water testing, or even something like plastic shot glasses to hold probes when you're cleaning them, some extra supplies in terms of wood or dowels from the hardware store. There's so many little things like that that I see day to day visiting different facilities. Storage, shelving, containers, all of that costs very little amount of money, whether you order it from Amazon or Uline or Granger. And so the main spiel I had this week with the op-ed at the beginning of the newsletter is very much, what problems do you have in day-to-day operations? And that can be anything. That can be programs, that can be staffing, that can be operations, that would be resolved with just $50. Because I suspect if you look around and you ask your team, there are some things that are being cobbled together in a way that's really stupid, honestly, for a $1 million operating budget or a multi-million dollar facility. The second part of the newsletter is always our different news stories, and I do try and curate the list of articles that I include. I do not throw in every single thing that I read or see. I do try and very much pick out the things that are unusual, exceptional, extra relevant, or maybe tip of spear in terms of a trend that's evolving. But each week it is always a mixed bag. And this week I would say is no different in terms of a mixture of legal decisions, facility openings, press releases, water safety, drowning prevention. I do try and balance it, but some weeks like this week, that's just not possible. The lead story in my mind this week that is only just developing, it only came out the day before or even the day of the April 1st newsletter, so we're going to see this evolve, is that in the United States, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, has gone ahead and sued SeaWorld regarding disability discrimination. This is huge. This goes back to in the fall. So I was in Disney and the Orlando area in October with my husband who has a mobility issue. And then shortly after we came back, there was this procedure where SeaWorld said that they were no longer going to allow a certain type of mobility device. So let me go ahead and click on our December 3rd newsletter. So in the December 3rd, 2025 newsletter, I did go through this in detail. And at the time, it basically said SeaWorld will no longer be allowing seated walkers in its theme park. So forgive me, I misspoke. I said October. This was actually November. I was in Florida actually every month last fall, September, October, November, December. So that's part of the confusion. But yes, my husband had come with me to IAPA in Orlando. We did get him a scooter because that was going to be the best option for his mobility in relation to what we wanted to do. And that was very beneficial. We did not go to SeaWorld, but we were using the scooter and other mobility devices in and around the major amusement parks in Orlando. And so this coming down shortly after we came home to Alberta in December was really shocking, that a company would not think that this would cause real concern. If you have, and I hate to say legitimate mobility issue, but there are definitely people out there who abuse the system and do not have legitimate mobility issues. I have seen that firsthand, navigating mobility issues with my husband for the last 6 or 7 years. He uses different devices. We have a handicap placard. We use golf carts and accessibility tools in airports. Those of you who followed me on social media for a while know that I try and share this as much as I can without, removing his privacy and autonomy. But all of this is a long way of saying, if we go back from the initial kind of hoopla in December, it did very much seem like SeaWorld was more concerned with profit than accessibility, never mind public relations, and the Americans with Disability Act, which is a federal law you have to follow. Then I don't know that I covered it. There was a discussion about, the DOJ had sent a letter to SeaWorld investigating further. They were not being charged at that time. And I want to say that was maybe January or February. And then now we are April 1st, 2026, and they are actually suing the park for disability discrimination. I am not American. I can't speak to the significance of this, but my perception as a layperson, when the federal government sues an entity, I think that's a higher standard than just a layperson suing an entity. So that is really, really interesting to consider and a bit telling. So that story is going to be evolving. We will continue to cover it in the weekly newsletter. And I do want to also mention that I'm aware that the newsletter is a little bit difficult to search when I'm looking for specific articles or topics we've covered in past newsletters. I thought we had that full functionality last year added, but in looking for something this week, I did notice that it is a little bit hard to search still. So I will be working on fixing that over the next couple of months. Other articles this week, more information is starting to come out from that evisceration injury, entrapment injury that occurred in Mexico almost a year ago. We did first feature a People News article last week's newsletter, but there hasn't been a ton of details. So I'm going to continue to share those articles as they become available, even though they are older, just because I know all of you who are accustomed to worrying about entrapment prevention do have questions. How did this happen? What can we do to prevent this? Was there something that wasn't done? Entrapment is something that we've talked about extensively on this YouTube channel and in our social media, as well as if you've taken the certified pool operator course with me, it is something that professionally I am very interested in being an advocate for, working with organizations like Abby's Hope, and just really promoting the topic in the industry for awareness, because it is 99.9% prevention. There's not a lot we can do once it happens. The next article I shared this week that I do want to comment on is a organization, a local council that is really tracking the cost associated with fecal contamination. And this strikes after my own heart, because when I was a municipal pool manager back in 2016, 2017, I had a swim club that basically resulted in 2 diarrhea contaminations in the span of a week, maybe 2 weeks. And in my opinion, it really came down to the education to the parents from the coaches. If the coaches and the swim club had set a precedent that you are not expected to practice when you're ill, parents would not send their kids to practice when they are very clearly ill. And at least in the second contamination that happened late one afternoon during swim club practice, my lifeguards reported that in speaking with the kid, he wasn't feeling well, and he told his mom he wasn't feeling well, and she disregarded the severity of the symptoms and made him go to practice anyway, so coach wouldn't get upset. The tie-in to this article is that I really do feel there are times when there should be financial consequences two groups or individuals if we can show that they blatantly disregarded education or guidance that was given to them, which is what we felt happened with the swim club. And I tried to charge the swim club in that situation. My recreation manager was very supportive of charging them for the pool closure, the canceled lessons, the staff time, the cleaning supplies, the water replacement. It came to about $1,500 Canadian. It was not $27,000, but it was also meant to be a symbolic amount in terms of we crunched the numbers, and it's not just a quote small inconvenience when there is a contamination. Contaminations do happen accidentally, there's no question, but in that particular incident, we really, really wanted to drive home that as part of their rental agreement, they had a responsibility to educate their swimmers and their families about what is and is not appropriate use of the pool. Needless to say, the swim club went to council, they complained, they never ended up paying anything, but I did think it was unfair to the rest of the community and ratepayers to have that pool closure, lessons canceled, staff losing their hours, etc., and only one group is responsible. So I don't have a perfect solution in every instance where this occurs, but I do think it is an important point of conversation that there is a limit to equitably sharing costs if it is the result of one particular group or vandalism or malicious intentions or things like that. You may have a different opinion for your facility, but I do recommend that every group or facility come up with an hourly operating cost. What would it look like without lost revenue or bookings or rentals or admissions? What would it look like if your pool is going to be down for at least 13 hours from a utility, staff, revenue perspective? Having that number handy, which we had to calculate at the time this occurred, is really beneficial to be able to speak authoritatively with leadership or council about the consequences of repeated closures. Couple other articles I shared this week. I shared a situation where vandals caused damage at the construction site of a new water park, which is really disturbing, but unfortunately very predictable if you don't have good security procedures in place, fencing, cameras to prevent people from hopping the fence. I shared a really cool idea where free admission is being offered to the families of the firefighters who fought the fire at the Gulf State Park, Waterville, USA. The water park is offering free admission to firefighters who battled the fire in their Gulf State Park. One of the daycare owners responsible for the 2023 drowning fatalities of 2 toddlers at a daycare, one pled guilty before the start of trial, and then the other defendant was found guilty at trial. The sentence has not been levied yet, so we're waiting to see that sentencing. In the video I watched with the prosecutor, their main point is that there were many opportunities to fix this extreme hazard. And so we'll see what that looks like in terms of what is my word? Whether they pay a fine, whether they go to jail, what the punishment is. I did share a article, content warning regarding a man who exposed himself in a sauna on a cruise ship to some underage teens. I don't like to share these stories as much as the next person, but I think we do need to talk about sauna steam room safety and not just from a heat perspective. So I was recently working with a client where I stated to them, in my personal opinion, the steam room is really, really dark from a female safety perspective. I'm not sure if I would feel comfortable using your steam room. Illumination is required for safety, so you don't fall down the stairs, you don't slip on the wet floor. Also, if it's a co-ed steam room, I want to be able to see, kind of what's going on, be able to get out. That client didn't necessarily agree with me, so this is a bit of a drumbeat I'll be talking about over the next couple of months as it comes up that steam rooms and saunas, in my experience as a lifeguard and pool manager, are where crimes happen, unfortunately. They're not always caught. They're not always reported. So we do need to be talking about this more so that people have an awareness that these spaces are dark. People are half naked, they may be mixed co-ed, and I'm not suggesting that has to happen, but it does happen quite often, unfortunately, in many different settings. I shared an article for a story that I'm following out of El Paso, Texas, where it's alleged a woman drowned at a salon, like a hair salon. I'm going to guess this is going to end up being a cold plunge fatality because when I looked at the social media for the spa, they had a sauna that they added in July of 2025. I'm going to go ahead and draw the conclusion that they also had some sort of bathtub or cold plunge for contrast therapy, even though I couldn't easily find the services on the website or I couldn't find a photo on social media of a cold plunge. I mean, I suppose you could drown in the basin where your hair is being washed. That would be equally tragic, but I'm waiting for more details to come out from El Paso, Texas, because I'm not looking for the first cold plunge drowning, but I do think it is going to happen, and it is something that we need to be aware of as a risk. I shared a drowning recently that's resulted in a lawsuit at an Airbnb in Florida. I shared that the family was asleep and the child got out of the house. The allegation is that the residential pool being used for commercial services did not have the necessary equipment required by Florida bylaw for a pool. I don't know if that was a fence, a gate, door alarms, pool alarms. We will get more details hopefully as that case moves forward. And a quick note, I do have a recording of my Southwest Pool and Spa Show session from the Women's Forum. I have not released that. I do have to edit it, and it's just been really busy. So I appreciate your patience. That will be coming down the line on our YouTube channel on the presentation playlist eventually. A couple other articles I shared pertaining to a woman who was shut down for having a swim school in her backyard in violation with local zoning or permits. There's a ton of comments on that article that you can dig into on the Washington Post website if you would like. Following another article out of Estonia regarding the minimum standard of care, minimum training, minimum expertise of lifeguards employed in a situation where somebody fatally drowned. Shared an article of a man who jumped in from a waterfall and then ended up not surfacing. So the supposition is that the force of the water kept him underneath. He wasn't able to come up and breathe. And that has come up several times now in several conversations with spillover pools and other situations in pool construction. So this is something that I'm professionally curious about. The force of the water can actually be a risk in terms of operations. Shared an article regarding a little boy who drowned in a neighbor's decorative koi fish pond. Water is water, whether it's intended for swimming or not. There's an ongoing debate in Fredericton, in New Brunswick, regarding aquatic infrastructure reinvestment. This is one of those areas of Canada that is going down the road to an infrastructure crisis, a pool crisis, like we saw from the Acadia pool closure, like we've seen in Vancouver with pool closures, like we're seeing across Canada where these 40, 50, 60-year-old pools, Northern Ontario, Lakehead University, Sudbury, Thunder Bay, where these pools are closing permanently, not reopening because we're looking at 10, 15 million to keep a pool running. There's also some other comments I put regarding people complaining that their resort was closed after they booked it for a holiday. The water park was not available for use and it wasn't advertised as such on the website. Xcaret, the famous amusement/water park in Mexico, is currently unable to use Mayan culture in their marketing due to claims from local indigenous groups. I think that's a really interesting precedent because Xcaret definitely leans heavily into the historic culture of their property. Royal Caribbean announced and then opened bookings for a brand new ship this week, Hero of the Seas, their Icon class ship. I did put down a deposit to sail in 2028. That is one of the signature partnerships between Martin Aquatics, out of Orlando with Royal Caribbean. They're doing really incredible things with the water parks, the different pools at sea, the swim up bar. So, yes, I love cruising, but I also love seeing the fruits of these collaborations because they're really, really interesting designs. And then I shared a few other projects this week in terms of the some different water parks and urban pools being built around the US. On the side, I wanted to share a photo that was sent to me by Dominique McDonald, formerly of the University of Calgary Lifeguard Games. I had been speaking with a group recently about playing a Guess Who game for lifeguards using basically those plastic signboards and printed paper, and then putting them on floating mats and doing scanning activities. So she was able to send me a photo. This is kind of one of the only ones she had, but it gives you an idea of what the candidates were doing around this was the one end of the 50-meter pool with the bulkhead. And then at the very bottom of the newsletter, I'm still linking to our weekly advice column, which you're welcome to click on, add any anonymous questions or comments or topics you'd like to see me discuss, either in the weekly newsletter or in social media in general. And then at the bottom of the newsletter, I have linked to the recording from last week's newsletter, as well as this spinal vice roll drill that I learned in Calgary a couple summers ago. I made a quick video so that people know how to do it on their own. That is it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm in a different place, so next week I'll be back in Alberta. If you celebrate Easter or Passover, I hope you have a great holiday. Enjoy some great time with your family. I will be back next week. The newsletter is going to continue every week for the foreseeable future. I don't have any scheduled gaps probably until mid-May. Thanks so much for being here. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything else you want me to chat about in next week's newsletter. See you next week. Bye for now.